one of the crucial things is that we have to make sure that every single dollar that goes into education goes into efforts and strategies that have a proven track record where you use data, whatever, to increase student performance and close the achievement gap. The day is over in the state of Minnesota where you can just throw money at schools and hope things are going to improve. We know a lot of good things are happening, but we have to make sure as a state, and by the way, education funding is 40% of the state budget. We have to make sure that every single dollar that goes into education not only improves the value for that student, but improves the value for the community and the state. And that's why if we can build the world's best workforce, it doesn't just help the students that come through. It helps communities, it helps the economy, it helps the quality of life of the state for the resident. And that's the commitment we're going to make. So how are we going to get there? We did get, we kind of set our budget proposal in the House. In our budget proposal in the House, we're going to commit about $550 million new dollars to education. And one good thing about education, well, there's a lot of good things. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, but I teach myself. I'm a social studies teacher. I've taught for 30 years, and I still teach the first half of the year before we go into session. But one of the things we know is that we know what works. We have all sorts of data that tells us what works. And we know that we can get the best value for the dollar in early childhood education all day, every day kindergarten. And so we're looking at placing a large percent of the dollars, of those new dollars, into early childhood education, and for the first time in the history of the state, fully funding all day, every day kindergarten. Now, why is that important? The data shows, and you can almost use anything, that kids that have early childhood education and all day, every day kindergarten have higher graduation rates, they have higher proficiency rates, closes the achievement gap, there's less special education costs, less jail incarceration costs later on. There's just huge benefits. In fact, Art Rolnick, who's worked with the Federal Reserve, has studied this and says that the return for every $1 that goes into early education pays itself back probably about 16 times. So why wouldn't we put dollars into those areas that we know not only get us the best results, but actually gives us the best value for the dollar? And here at Albert Lea, where there's full-time everyday kindergarten, the school has said this is important, so we're paying for it. But the state isn't paying for it. In fact, Albert Lea has to really subsidize about $2,400 per student, pull it somewhere out of the budget. So now, finally, they're not going to have to do that. They're going to get the money to fund it. About 10,000 parents around the state has to pay a fee for their kids to do kindergarten. No longer are they going to have to do that. We're going to pay for the kindergarten straight up. And then what you need to do, you have to make sure kids are reading by 3rd grade, have an assessment level that doesn't just measure. And we're not looking at more tests, but we have to do the assessment differently. Instead of just waiting to the very end, oh, you didn't make it. We, along the route when you're taking these tests, we say, okay, if you're down to here, we got to bring you up. You're here, we bring you up, so that you're ready here when you graduate from high school to either be career ready or college ready. And for the first time also in the history of the state, you've got the people from the college universities, the commissioner from education, and the person from higher ed all working together to try to align that. Right now, 40% of all of our graduates out of high school, when they go on to a college, have to take a remedial course. And that's extra cost, extra time. Let's get that all done now. And not everyone's going to go off to college, so we get them ready for their career too. And so, how do you get to the world's best workforce? You start early where you know the data shows huge results, and then you make sure you provide the resources so schools they're on a path, they link up with higher ed or career, and help they go. That's the way we can do that. And so what's going to be the key is we have to use dollars in a very strategic way, in that making sure that everything's accountable along the way. So that's going to be the efforts that we have going this year, and I think it's not going to be done overnight, but that is going to be the goal out of our plan, is just strategically plan maximize every dollar of education because, not only do you educate your community, but we know in a lot of our rural communities that our schools are many times our largest employer. That and our medical facilities in a lot of rural spots. Anyway, that's what we're going to be doing in education. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thanks so much for coming out. And I don't know, Shannon, how you want to do things, but certainly open up the questions. Or
open up the questions.
Okay. So, yeah, and so you want to know about what we're doing down at the state too, outside the education. That's I'm also on the tax committee and the Ways and Means committee. So maybe answer some tax questions. Yes.
Representative Marquart, Plain Lake Funk, and I'm the superintendent for the Area School District. And I commend you for your efforts towards all-day, everyday kindergarten. Minnesota likes to think of itself as a progressive state, and had an opportunity to be administrator in Wisconsin for a number of years. This was a number of years ago, many years into funding all-day, everyday kindergarten. So it's great to see that the legislature is stepping up, and I think that we're going to see some very good things from them. My concern is, the new dollars you're talking about are tremendous, and we've been struggling for years and years to be in its vein. My concern is, I think that, I'm not sure what it is in the House, but I think next year they're talking about making it $50 to the formula. That's a significant increase with the all-day everyday and special ed. From a balance perspective, I would appreciate if we could see somewhat of a more increase in one of them. Because next year we're just going to be tough to make it to the following year. It's like a year ago.
Yeah, the governor's proposal is about $340 million, and that's the 1% the first year that you're talking about, that $52. Our target is about $550 million, which is about another 50 or 60% more. And so there will be more dollars that first year. And the all-day, everyday kindergarten would not take effect until the second year. So it would be the fall of 2014. Because a lot of school districts have some space needs, so they'd have to prepare for that. And we may put something in the bill also that would allow you to have a little more authority to do the lease, if you have a lease or do something.
Yeah, we're good there.
Okay, very good. Well, I know a lot of, 54, 57% of the students are in all day, every day right now. And so most of the schools are already doing that. So no, well, here's just, we're at 550. The governor's at 340, and basically, you take out the property tax relief in the Senate, it's about 340. So the House bill that we have is about 200 more for the classrooms than they have. So there'll be a bit of a give and take, but I agree. If you look at the stats, I didn't allude to this, but we're only have funded high school or schools at about half of the inflation rate. And then we have put on the evaluation without funding, done this without funding. I mean, I haven't figured that one out yet, but there's a lot that schools are, I remember as a teacher, when I started 30 years ago, there's a lot more we're responsible for. It's not just educating kids either, there's a lot of other things that schools are taking care of today. So I appreciate your comments.
John Lang, I'm from Albert Lea, and I've got a granddaughter that started out in Maquart school here, and their school was not up to par with the other schools. And we live down in the southwest part of town, so we